Good afternoon and welcome to today's Ad Week webinar, where we will be covering the future of the upfronts and the newfronts. And we know that that season is coming up, so we're going to get some candid appraisals of what to expect for this coming year. And our webinar today is being sponsored by Similarweb. I'm Stuart File, Vice President of Branded Content at Adweek, and I'm going to be your host for today's event. Before we begin, I'm just going to take a few moments here and do some of the standard webinar housekeeping, let you know what to expect from our presentation today, and also make sure that everyone knows where all the features of our webinar platform are. Our event should go somewhere in the 30-35 minute range. Afterwards, we are going to have plenty of time for audience questions. If at any point during today's presentation, and it's going to be mostly today a panel discussion, so if you have a question for any of our panelists, just simply use the question tool that you should see there on your screen, probably right underneath the window where you see me, and use that to submit your questions. And we're going to get to as many audience questions as we can following our live discussion. It's not too late to invite your colleagues to come and join us today, and we'd really love it if they would. To make this easy for you, when we sent you a final reminder email for today's event, you probably got that about 15 minutes ago, you're going to find in that email, you're going to find a link to the registration page. So grab that link, send it off to your colleagues. They still have lots of time to come on in, register, and join us live. But if they can't make it live, today's webinar is being recorded. It will be available on demand, and we're going to send a link to that on-demand recording to all of our registered users. You should get it sometime 3:30, 4 o'clock Eastern time today. So check your email, then you'll have that link. As I said, our webinar today is mostly conversational, but there will be a few slides up at the start of it. So if at any point, if you want a PDF of today's slide deck, it's only a handful of slides, you can grab that from the event resources area. You should see that link on your screen. So the PDF of the deck is available there. Lastly, we just always like to make sure that, you check out the Adweek webinar calendar, www.adweek.com/webinars with an S. Full webinar calendar coming up. I seem to say this every single time I host, but it's true. We're doing 3 webinars a week pretty consistently now through the end of Q1, and we should, and I think come April or May, we're going to be moving possibly to 4 webinars in a week. So with that all in mind, see what's coming up, lots of different topics. This is the first of 3 on this holiday shortened week. So tomorrow's really interesting stuff. I know we're going to be talking a little bit about customer experience and those areas. And then on Thursday, we have one on website accessibility, a really, really important topic out there for both brands and certainly agencies where that one is targeted. So see what's coming up. Sign up for an upcoming webinar. You can also go there to check out our entire archive of on-demand webinars. That's every webinar that we've done over the past 12 months. And if you go in there, you're going to find a few from our sponsors today at Similarweb. So go on in and check all of those out. So let's move on to today's webinar. And just very quickly, I want to introduce our speakers for everyone. We've really got just a great panel of experts here. And so let me just quickly give them just that quick 1-2 from Mindshare. We've got Matt Dennerstein. Matt's the managing partner and the portfolio investment lead. He's really been at the forefront as Group M has integrated its investment teams. And in his current role, he really oversees reservation spend on a diverse portfolio of accounts. He also represents Group M in a lot of upfront negotiations across multiple partners. So he certainly brings that media buying side to all of this. From the New York Times, we've got Jessica Worthington, who's the director of brand marketing and media strategy, where she obviously drives all of brand marketing and media at that publisher, including the great campaign that they have going these days. She joined the New York Times from Mindshare, where she was a senior partner working on media for Instagram, Facebook, Nike, and others. She's actually out of the Portland area. From Tenuity, we're happy to be joined by Jesse Math. Jesse is the VP of Advanced TV and Video Solutions. Again, focusing on things like convergent TV and tailoring TV screen first solutions for brand and direct-to-consumer advertisers. He's been in this industry across a range of areas, and our conversation today is going to be driven by Jackie Lee. Jackie's the head of publishers over at Similarweb, where she helps clients in the publisher industry uncover actionable insights to inform editorial decisions, bolster ad sales, meet subscription goals, and things like that. And she joined Similarweb from the New York Times. So as you can see, a lot of people here, a lot of backgrounds going on. Let me bring Jackie up for just a brief discussion and setting the stage for today's event. Welcome, Jackie.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for the introduction. Before we kick off the panel, I wanted to quickly introduce Similarweb. We provide cookieless and deviceless measurement and analytics on digital traffic interactions online. Our coverage spans over 100 million websites, nearly 5 million apps in 190 countries and 210 plus predefined industries. We collect information from 4 data sources. We have a contributory network of connected browser extensions and devices, and we marry that with data from public sources and partnerships. That data is anonymized, cleaned, aggregated, and modeled, and we validate that against a first-party direct measurement training set. Similarweb's model data helps publishing brands become influential digital-first organizations by helping editorial and SEO teams develop and surface new content. We work with ad sales teams to maximize ad revenue, and we partner with consumer revenue teams to drive subscription growth. For the purposes of the upfronts, our data helps media planning teams determine the most effective brands and spaces to direct their investments during this period. And on that note, the last time upfronts were fully staged in person, Zoom was a speed. Johnny and Daniel had yet to move the dojo to Netflix. And Carol Baskin, who? We've all seen some plot twists 2 years into this pandemic, and this year's seems to be in-person upfronts again. With that in mind, today we've brought together thought leaders from the client and agent side to talk about what they're looking forward to this year. And on that note, our first question is actually to Matt. This will be the second year of Upfronts and Newfronts in the middle of a never-ending pandemic. In your opinion, what do you think has changed for the better? What do you think has changed for the worse? And what do you think has permanently changed?
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for having me. In terms of what has changed for the better, the first thing that comes to mind is flexibility. Upfronts are a lot more flexible than they used to be. If you think back to the first upfront during this never-ending pandemic in 2020, the upfronts were supposed to start right in the wake of when the pandemic was happening. And there was a lot of uncertainty, understandably, about how much we could commit that far in advance. And we really found that, the networks worked with us. We were business partners. We were all in this together. And we did work to make sure there was more flexibility throughout the year. And that is pretty much held since then. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty much held for the past 2 years. What's changed for the worse, I feel like it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you could say this is for the better too, but the last 2 markets have, I think by all accounts, been rough markets, especially last year. We saw historically high premiums. And I think as rough as that was, and as many difficult conversations as we had, it did serve somewhat as a wake-up call to see more wholesale changes across how we buy, how flexible we are. It really helped focus the attention on the fact that the business is changing. And if we want to avoid that in perpetuity, we have to make changes to how we buy to make sure this model works for all parties moving forward.
Jess, on the brand side, I mean, it is your budget. So really curious to hear what your experiences have been.
Yeah, and hello, thanks for having me. I think something for the better that's come out of this pandemic is once we got past that first production halt at the beginning of the pandemic, we've really seen an explosion of amazing programming and content. Whereas we were sort of losing that linear water cooler TV moment, the amount of content coming across all the different OTT and streaming networks has really, I think, created a groundswell of really exciting programming that marketers want to be aligned to. I also think last year in the upfronts, we saw a real commitment to diverse slates of programming. And I think in this new world, there are just more interesting niche projects that are getting greenlit across all of the variety of networks. And I don't think there's been a more exciting time for people to watch these shows in their living room on a big screen. So as a marketer, that's very exciting. Similar to Matt, well, maybe perhaps a double-edged sword using that is with all of that new programming also comes a whole lot of new places to buy. And as a marketer, that is challenging. We can't be everywhere. And I think a real challenge within our industry is, as again, we kind of deal with the wealth of platforms and places to buy, is how we start to measure that effectively. How do we kind of look at controls and how our media is showing up across platforms? So those are sort of my better and worse. Jesse, curious your thoughts.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thanks for having me, Jackie. The first word that I would use is really the same first word that Matthew would use, and that word is flexibility. I think, just like Jess said, there's so much content, and consumers, something that's good that's happened, right? Viewers have been empowered to truly watch on their own terms. That's not a new story that we need to cover here, but I think that that's led to this place of flexibility where there is mutual territory where buyers and sellers want to meet. And I think that it's been hard to predict 12 months out what viewing habits are going to look like, what's going to influence spend patterns. And I think that the sell side is increasingly bullish on monetizing all of their premium video across all touch points and consumption points, and buyers have a desire to meet their consumers where their consumers are viewing, and add flexibility to their buys as well. So that is something that I expect to see. These deals this season, we're going to see rate cards that have all kinds of options on them, and I think that's an exciting development for both the buy and the sell side.
Given how diverse the buying surfaces are, and there's been this whole upswell of like new streaming partners that have come online in the last couple of years, I'm curious, do you guys have a lot of conversations on thinking through how to measure and how to almost report back on how these things performed? Seems like it would be more complex. It's great having variety, but then it's just even more complex, just reporting back if it worked or not.
It's more complex. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah, I can jump in, and that is kind of a key challenge. I think first you have to align on what you're trying to measure beforehand, because you need to know what you're trying to accomplish before you can actually go in and measure it. But it's no secret that measurement is one of the big challenges we're facing in the industry now, and there's a lot of changes coming, and hopefully that evolves to a new standard where you can look at everything from top funnel to bottom, and you can see how your overall buy that targets awareness is translating down to more bottom funnel metrics like performance, clicks, things like that.
Yeah, and I'd say where the expansion of all these platforms, again, is positive is we know it's building incremental reach. We know we're finding audiences who maybe weren't watching linear television in these new connected spaces. And so that's wonderful. But again, where we have transparency into the control of the frequency of our message, are we bombarding people when we show up across these platforms? How do we break down those walled gardens to understand and better control the way that our messages roll out?
Yeah, measurement is a really fickle word in this space. I think that when you say measurement, Jackie, like Matthew, Jess, and I probably all hear it in somewhat of a different way, or take it to mean something different. But that's one of the really exciting things about this upfront season. It's going to be the first season post Nielsen MRC accreditation. It's going to be, there have been thank you to our friends at NBC for their 108-page report on measurement opportunities that they released last week. Viacom, CBS, Paramount, have really some alternatives and made some announcements in that space. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see what the sell side is leaning into in terms of alternatives when it comes to reach and frequency measurement and audience currency. And I think I would also expect a continuation of a trend that we really saw last year in the Newfronts about shoppable experiences, and really forget about this funnel, just like one impression, full funnel opportunities to make premium TV screen-based content shoppable. There's going to be a lot more that comes in that area.
I mean, I guess, with some of these, with this evolution, I mean, not even evolution, it's almost like innovation that's coming through. My next question is actually to Jess. I mean, it's, knowing that we're not just going to be, hey, watch this one commercial on this linear TV experience. It's like, watch this commercial on your phone and then click out and potentially buy something. How do you think this has changed the value and the valuation of upfront versus scatter? And with that, given that it's not just even the evolution of the existing KPIs, but it's like with these like brand new KPIs that didn't exist before, would love to just get your POV on the trends that you're seeing. And as the ultimate owner of that budget of your goals, like, would love to hear your POV.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions to unpack in that. So I'll start with the first one that I heard, which is around, I think, what I get excited about, which is potential, like more experimentation, right? Like last year we started to see, as Jesse was just talking about, more engagement driving products. What is there to offer beyond a 30 or 15-second spot in these spaces? And it could be on your phone, but it could also be on the big screen. So I think what we still have to test is what is an audience's appetite for those things. And so I think what Upfronts and Newfront partnerships allow us to do is kind of go out there and test and learn together and to try new products and see how that sort of meets the objectives that we have as brands, whether that's upper funnel metrics or again, having something that's far more interactive and driving some lower funnel conversions. In terms of, did you want to say something, Jackie?
No, continue.
Oh yeah, great. So then I think in evaluating the upfront versus scatter and the value there, of course, the backbone of upfronts has often been the efficiencies and in the negotiations that we have and the buying power of our wonderful media agencies that buy on our behalf. But I think last year, what was really top of mind for us at the New York Times was how are we able to guarantee the inventory we want? Because the scatter marketplace looked really sort of uncertain as to what was going to be left over in a time when the upfronts were in such demand, where inflation was so high. And again, some of that premium programming was looking to be quite scarce in the linear space. So for me, I think that, the guarantee of the programming and the day parts that we wanted to be a part of was really a driver in why upfronts were important to us last year.
I guess piggybacking on something that Matt had talked about earlier about the flexibility of these partnerships, do you feel like, the expectation is you're testing these new spaces, is you're testing, or is you're buying more upfront to sort of guarantee that? Do you feel like you're getting that partnership back in these different ways?
I think for the most part, yes. I think for the most part, upfront, in as much as we're talking about testing in new spaces and audience buying, the vast majority of upfront buying is still done across, it's a broad reach target, it's a broad demo, it's the most efficient price, but we are still carving out areas where we can test and learn and see how we can evolve into more audience buying, more performance outcome-based metrics. But I think the value in the upfront, it's still what it's always been. The pendulum always kind of swings back and forth, where scatter is kind of soft. You say, what do I do in upfront? You wait, everyone does that, and then the scatter market gets really expensive, and it goes back the other way. As long as there's scarcity in the marketplace, and there is with linear, there's going to be an upfront market. It's a futures market. So as long as there's less inventory to buy, there will be an advantage to buying it upfront, reserving it at the most efficient price, and then leaving money set aside either as part of that or later in the year to test out more progressive tactics.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think it's interesting because I think agencies like ours and practices like mine, where we're focused on advanced currencies and audiences and measurement, it's been a focal point. But I think, now when the sell side is looking at the Nielsen currency, which the vast majority of dollars will continue to be transacted on for the foreseeable future, they're very conscious of what they might be losing out on in that transaction. And the sell side might actually be more at the forefront of pushing these alternative currencies, whereas the buy side is going to be wary of what they might lose out on in the transition from Nielsen to the advanced currency. So despite all the progress, I do agree that for the foreseeable future, it's going to be more of the same on the currency front.
That's really interesting because, I mean, I know when Nielsen lost their accreditation, it was it was partly because, brands like NBC were feeling they were being undervalued in this case. The fact that despite this, it's still the currency, that's got to kind of be a bit of a punch to the gut for some of these brands, for these publishers. I mean, do you think it's undervaluing in that case or no?
I think Nielsen has for a long time been the best option for measuring broad awareness and a broad audience. Nielsen is totally revamping their product, which we'll hear more about in the coming year or two. But it's no secret that it's an open question whether that will be the currency moving forward, or whether it'll evolve to something else that's either just broad based or more full funnel. But to Jesse's point, I think in the foreseeable future, at least in the near future, Nielsen still will be what we work off of.
Oh, that's really interesting. I guess pivoting a little bit, Jesse, this next question is more so targeted for you because I know you work on Streaming Plus. It's more of a connected TV product. I know that there's been a lot of scarcity, not just with linear, but also with CTV inventory. I know in Q4 it was really challenging finding any. How do you think, this coming year between the upfronts period, between new shows, new streaming providers, how do you think publishers and media brands are going to adjust their inventory availability and buying options, knowing that last year it was almost gone?
Yeah. While I agree that last year, the CTV inventory and streaming inventory that publishers were looking to sell as an upfront did virtually sell out. That's not to misconstrue that there weren't secondary markets, even upfront markets, secondary upfront markets, scatter markets, programmatic markets that were healthy for most of the year, with, to your point, some exception in Q4, where there are some very messy situations. But I think that networks were encouraged by the past 12 months. I think between viewership habits shifting, supply chain issues affecting advertisers, they really didn't know how to, it was unpredictable for the sell side in terms of how much inventory to make available. And I think they were encouraged by the past 12 months. And I think they're going to open more of that. And we're going to see some more opportunity this year. Plus, there's just brand new ad-supported streaming options that are scaling versus where they were last year. With more options, even with more overall viewership, means more fragmented viewership. And so, that's going to be what really is interesting to track, to see, how much these publishers can guarantee for 12 months as shows launch and audiences churn, and all of that. One thing, though, from a buying perspective, I think I agree with Jess's point about how much great content there is out there, but I'm approaching the season a little bit less focused on content because it's just a given. There's great content everywhere. And now the question is, where is the audience, right? Where can we find audiences at scale, especially when we're layering on data and looking for specific non-broad age and gender-based targets? Where can we find our audience? So gone are the days where I'm truly going to be influenced by a photo opportunity with the Real Housewives at an in-person upfront. And now I really want to know, and have some assurances that my audience is going to be where they are, platform to platform.
Yeah, I guess, one of the follow-ups that I'd have on that, speaking of where are your audiences, now that we are starting to open up, people are starting to go back to work, would love to get your perspective on, are they literally going to still be watching and listening, I guess, in some cases, at the same rate that they have been now that you're leaving the house again?
I think for the most part, the trend is clear and it will continue. The evolution towards streaming options versus linear, I don't think that's going to be disrupted by people going back to work. And the same holds for people, getting more into podcasts, listening to Spotify, Pandora. I think those trends will continue. It's somewhat gotten back to normal in the past 6 months, so I don't think we'll see any major variation.
And just does that impact your? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think what's also interesting is, the content on streaming does not follow necessarily the same broadcast calendar. And so you have these moments throughout the year to kind of intercept culture and conversation because it's not following maybe, again, the same production schedules or launch periods or rollouts that linear TV once had. So again, I think there's more opportunity for consumers to watch when they want. And that, to Matt's point, I think we'll continue to see post-pandemic. But churn, to Jesse's point, is also potentially a real thing. And I think, again, it's why the measurement side of this and the transparency side of this, especially for the newer platforms that have launched, is just really important for us as buyers and as brands to really understand the scale and the audiences that exist. And again, we have to make choices. I love all of the platforms. As a consumer, I probably have far too many, but as a brand and buyer, that doesn't mean I have the budgets to go buy across all of those things, nor do I need to. So again, I think that transparency and audience piece is really critical.
Yeah, it definitely is a positive to Jesse's point about there being more ad-supported options. We're seeing, platforms like Pluto and Tubi grow, Peacock. So there are more options out there in the streaming space to run ads. That is definitely a positive development for us.
And those are the areas where I think we can look for like what the content slate is going to be because I think that advertisers really do want that comfort that those areas are premium, not just audience opportunities, but premium content hubs. We saw Tubi announce originals for the first time last year's season. We saw like Roku and the Roku channel announce a slate of originals. So I do that is one area where I do think there is appetite for the content lens but I think there's going to be a little bit less like, oh, I really need to buy more, whatever it is, Paramount than NBC or vice versa because of a particular show. We know all that content, those content production budgets have exploded. We want to be around all of it as long as our audience is.
You guys all spoke a bit about audience and finding the right audiences. I'm going to actually switch gears a little bit, and this is a bit of a jump ball question. As buyers and as planners for your brands or for your client brands, what is the top emotion that you want your brand associated with when someone encounters one of your pieces of advertisements? And what are the environments have you chosen in the past to sort of enforce that, and why?
You guys want to go ahead?
I told you it was a jump ball.
To me, it varies so much by client and by brand. Working on a portfolio of accounts, it could be something very different for a studio account versus travel versus pharma. But I think what you're asking really gets more to going back to contextual buying, which I think is brought up a lot. As we talk about the deprecation of cookies and moving more towards an audience targeted by and not being able to rely on data, maybe it is more context that you look at. And in that case, that is, that will be an important tactic, but what the specific context is, I think, again, will vary a lot by the advertiser and their message.
Yeah, I can speak for us. I think, I don't know if this is an emotion or a mindset, but I think something around being dynamic. I think our latest campaign that we launched for the Times this month is really celebrating the breadth of our report and to kind of show how the Times journalism can surprise and really enrich your life. And I think that's given us some freedoms in our media buying and investments to look into new and maybe unexpected places where we'll show up to intercept a curious audience who would really love to subscribe to the Times. So I think we've really moved over the last few years from what maybe felt very news adjacent to a broader breadth of again, how we talk about ourselves, but also how we're showing up in the world.
Yeah, Jess, I did notice the latest campaign profiled 3 very, very different subscribers at varying tenures. How did you sort of, I guess, align on strategy, given that, at least the people that were featured are so different?
Yeah, I think that was very much the point. And there were 5 or maybe 7. We had quite a few that we showcased through various different formats and how this campaign came to life across channels. But again, I think Times journalism is again, it is varied. It is there's depth to it and breadth to it that we wanted to showcase. And I think through some amazing consumer research we did, we just got to learn about the parts of our report that people really enjoyed. And I think coming out of again a really heavy couple of years where the news cycle and particularly all this coverage and talk about the pandemic, it was a nice time to kind of sit back and look through a consumer lens versus, the brand lens.
Jessie, for the brands that you're working with now, do you feel like there is sort of this emergence at all coming through? And how are you thinking about advising them when you're working with these brands?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I see from a performance lens and Tenuity, our Streaming Plus offering, we're the largest independent agency in streaming TV media. So we have all kinds of advertisers, and some of them prioritize reach and frequency and contextual and emotion. And many of them really prioritize performance and outcomes. In both cases, as we're advising them, it's about the fact that there truly is no such thing as an adult 25 to 54. I've never met a 25-year-old who's like a 54-year-old, right? And even within our more advanced audience definitions, which we're increasingly able to transact on, it's about putting that power in the hands of the consumer and reaching them in environments and in mindsets that matters to that individual. And so we're focused on now is ways of buying with increased efficiency against an advanced audience target. Because the fact of the matter is that with all the increase in viewership across all these different destinations, there's fewer ad opportunities on the TV screen than ever before, right? Traditional TV is a heavy ad load environment. Some of that viewership is moving into non-ad supported environments, and the viewership that shifts into ad supported environments tends to be in lighter ad load environments. 40% of all ad-supported streaming consumption is on YouTube. More people are using ad-supported connected TV than use Instagram. And still, traditional TV is the #1 time spent in terms of all media, and that extends across demos. So we really need to find ways to meet the consumer. And again, we're not talking, in many cases, adults 25 to 54. We might be talking about an outdoor enthusiast or a first-party CRM list. And we want to find ways to guarantee on those audiences wherever and however they're watching.
Well, and I mean, it's interesting because, when you're thinking about that outdoor enthusiast, the way I think about this is programmatically, you would go ahead and pick that cookie pool. Knowing we are moving away from devices, from personalized advertising in that way, how do you think about almost backing into that profile in environments that are also not traditionally cookie supported? How do you find that person?
Yeah. Increasingly, there are commonly accepted new currencies, which are accepted across both the streaming and linear spaces that are backed up by the same data spine for both targeting and measurement. And I think there are viable alternatives of ways of leaning into this convergent video space to guarantee on audiences. I mean, that is a reality. I think that the question, though, is, especially with the kinds of brands that like Matt is working with, is what are the brands that are willing to make that the focal point of their buying strategy, and what are the brands that are using it as a supplement to their buying strategy, and how is that going to influence the MMMs that dictate investment, for the next 5 years. So we do come from somewhat different worlds in the kinds of brands that we're catering to, but I think there's exciting opportunities to play in this convergent space across both, and I know that the sell side is increasingly bullish on offering that as an upfront option this year.
And that's why, again, I think last year's upfront was so important in pushing clients to think more in those terms and realize that if they aren't already moving in that direction, then it's time to start thinking about that, because the old model is not going to hold for much longer.
Matt, I think it's interesting because you were saying that you think Nielsen is still the currency, but it sounds like there's these like new competing forces. Do you think this is the year where we're going to sort of see that get worked out, or is that still a couple years down the line?
In 2022, I think it's more likely to be next year when Nielsen 1 comes out, and we can really look at that and compare that to what the other options are, whether that be, Kantar or some of the other companies. But again, I definitely think it's an open question. That being said, again, in the near future, I think we're still working off Nielsen, knowing that we need to prep for a possible alternative based on the fact that the companies themselves are changing and the fact that the way we do business is changing, moving more towards audience buying versus broad.
Great. So Stuart, I just wanted to maybe connect with you and see if we've got any questions coming from the audience here. I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for that today.
And we do. I'm just going to sort of adjusting screens, and let me just sort of like get things going here. We've got a number of questions queued up here, Jackie. And again, we definitely want to get into some of that. Actually, bear with, here we go. This should get me up top here. There we go. All right. So we've got a number of questions coming in. I just want to take a second here for everyone, and just, as we transition, I want to just again to our audience, if you've got a question for any of our speakers here, first off, just use the question tool you see on your screen. We're going to take some audience questions for the next 10 minutes or so. So again, let us know, submit them. We're going to get to what we can. If we don't get to your question, I will forward it over to our sponsors at Similarweb. So no guarantees about offline responses, but just know that we've seen all the questions. And if someone can respond offline, I'm sure that they will. Before we even get into these questions, I'd also want to remind you today's webinar has been recorded. It's going to be available on demand. We're sending you a link to that on-demand version rather shortly. So about 3:30, 4 o'clock this afternoon. So see that link. Share it with your colleagues. They still have plenty of time. If they've got the time and they want to get some of this knowledge, they can definitely go and listen to that recording. So again, share away, better yet, have them register. We'll send them the link directly. Also want to remind you of the slides, which at the very beginning, if you wanted some of the background about Similarweb, you can get a PDF of that deck right now in event resources. So let's get to some of these questions, everybody. And so I'm going to avoid a jump ball here, but actually, Jesse, I'm going to start off with you on this one, but let's everyone come in. Look, we've talked a lot about upfronts as we've done all of this stuff. The title of this has the new fronts in there. Open question, first off. We know the history of the new fronts, which of course is there as sort of TV alternative. I think things have caught up. So number one, do we need a new fronts? And two, what do you ultimately look for as you're going there and you're going to sort of what I want to say is almost some of these alternative video channels that have come through to learn as part of that sort of more full funnel execution going forward with some of those? So I guess the open question is, do we even need a new front going on? And we can go from there.
Need is a strong word. I think it's good to have a venue to speak directly to the digital buyer and the digital brands. Like I said, like even the word measurement. If you say the word measurement in a room of TV buyers and digital buyers, like it will be heard many, many different ways. That said, it is coming together. Last year, Newfront participants included A&E, I believe AMC, NBC has been a participant. So it is interesting to see the traditional TV publishers migrating to the Newfronts to speak directly to the digital buyers. OpenAP, was a Newfront presenter last year, which is doing a lot in the TV buying space. So what am I looking for? I think I'm looking for audience. I'm looking for audiences. I'm looking for innovations, new uses of data, new applications for this world of convergent TV. I'm looking for diversity and speaking to all viewers and not the viewers that have specifically been spoken to in these environments, as well as creators and voices. I think that brands are going to be very focused on finding opportunities to speak to the diversity that is America. And I'm in a week of taking no other meetings and taking notes furiously.
Yeah. Matt, what are you looking at for Newfront's time, and where does that fit into your strategy?
I think I would agree with Jesse in that it's useful to see what they have, not just in terms of programming, but in terms of new tech and new tools. And it's really just a way for us to kind of get a holistic sense of the landscape, to see what all partners have, what they're premiering. It's still kind of funny that it's happening in this what's now somewhat arbitrary timing, planning in May and June for the coming calendar year. But that's when the money is spent. That's when everyone's attention is focused on this. So it does make sense to use that time to showcase whatever it is publishers have to showcase.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Another question came in. And so, Jess, I'll send this one a little bit your way as we go on. But this was coming in really talking about, some of the digital channels as we look through here. In particular, what this person was describing is sort of the, let's just call it the inventory that is not the triopoly. As we go on. So the social channels, the other channels that sort of go on, what can they begin to do to sort of, again, I want to say resecure audiences as they do here? What gets your attention as a buyer on this when working with them and to sort of get some sort of an annual upfront commitment in what is, again, we're talking an increasingly fragmented ecosystem. So again, as we think that through, right, not just in the digital hearth, right, not just the living room, but as we're thinking every other device that's surrounding and that people are using through that, particularly mobile.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for me, I think a lot of these platforms, in my mind, and coming from a brand perspective, I'm not going to speak to acquisition because that's not so much what I do, but I think they all really have their superpowers, and I want to see in presentations the strength of like what Twitter can bring, what Reddit can bring, what Snap can bring. I really feel like the consumer behavior in those spaces are very different. And what I don't want to do as a brand marketer is kind of put the same solution in all of those spots. I want to do something that feels very authentic to the audience there and how they're utilizing that channel. So while I think in these presentations, we again, I think what's wonderful to see is the advancement in audience segmentation and data. I think it's wonderful to see what new products and technologies exist. But for me, I'm so interested in understanding what ad products come out that can bring me closer to the experience on that platform and the consumers and how they're using it.
Mm-hmm. So does that require like the sort of annual presentation, or as a large advertiser, are you getting those all the time? I guess what I'm trying to think of, we talk a lot about flexibility and going through this. Well, it's hard to be flexible on when you're getting an annual presentation kind of a thing.
I do think there's benefit to the presentations. Again, it is a marathon. There's a lot to digest. But I also think it's an opportunity. There's so many acquisitions that happen over the course of a year, new technologies, again, that get brought on, content studios that are purchased. Having one centralized place to kind of talk about those things in a consolidated way is really helpful because, again, as we plan throughout the year, admittedly, our attention is not always, at the very top. So this is a week where I can really sort of lean into what's happening in our industry and kind of understand the updates and changes.
Mm-hmm.
It helps make an investment more of an integrated process too. Just, not talking about TV and summarizing the upfront in May and then doing the same thing 6 months later, for example, with the digital world. It's better to kind of do it all at once and plan out accordingly based on what you saw.
Got it. And so, Matt, as with all this, I know it's an overarching question. We like the discussion is always about flexibility, and there are questions coming in, obviously, all related to that, of trying to stay flexible in your buys going forward. But we're still talking about annual commitments and things going right that are much more sort of locked in. So, how do you? Do we need a flex front model? We need something else to come before the word front going forward, I guess. But what does everything look like as you're building out your budgets and you're building out your buys and you're working with your clients and you're negotiating going forward? But you do need to maintain like a flexibility, and that doesn't let you sort of deal. It's hard to have real-time ad buying when you're committed well ahead of time. So where do you go in that? Are you reapportioning budgets? What is sort of like, I guess, your recommended strategy?
There's no one size fits all. It's a balancing act. I think in as much as there's understanding on both the seller and the buyer side that flexibility is more important now than it was pre-COVID, more than it ever was. There's still going to be some kind of pricing break for committing up front, and the pricing break is because some of those dollars are firm. So that's going to always be part of the equation, but I think it's going to really be a matter of working with publishers throughout the year and when you lock in the deal to come up with terms that are mutually beneficial that give the advertisers the flex they need, whether that be straight up cancellation or fluidity across channels or across properties. It's a matter of giving the client the assurance that there is flexibility built in to make step changes throughout the year because things are changing so rapidly. But I think there always will be some level of commitment in the upfront, which you need in order to get the most efficient pricing.
Yeah. Jesse, anything on your end of you're seeing with your clients on the flexibility front?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that flexibility can still mean that there's a commitment or on the TV side and potentially an endeavor on the digital side. But I think that the flexibility comes in how you reach that commitment, right? So instead of just like one rate for that, you will run with said publisher at this amount, now you can have flexibility in terms of how you reach that commitment. So what's your rate going to be for, traditional buy? What's going to be the rate for layering audience on top of that? What's going to be the rate for programmatic? And what's that structure, and we can go on, right? And so how do all these line items come together to encompass all of your strategies working together to make good on that commitment?
Yeah. Wow. Talk about again another transitional year as we go forward here. Listen, unfortunately, I'm looking at the clock, and as much as I'd love to take more and more of these questions, we are running out of time. So let me thank everyone on our panel here really quickly. Really appreciate it. Again, our sponsors at Similarweb. Jackie, thank you for putting this panel together. And again, thanks everyone for not only your candid conversations, but also taking some time to answer some of these questions that have been coming in from the audience. To our audience, I just want to share just a couple of quick reminders here for everyone. Again, check your email. You're getting that link to the on-demand version. Share it. Of course, if you like this conversation, I'm sure your colleagues will as well. If you want the slides, they're in event resources. We know they're just a few in there. And lastly, adweek.com/webinars, our webinar calendar. You're going to see it when you log out, see what's coming up, sign up for an upcoming webinar, check out our archive of on-demand webinars, look for some things from our sponsors at Similarweb. So I want to thank our panel today. I want to thank our sponsors at Similarweb. I want to thank our audience for taking time out of your busy day. And we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar. Thanks, everybody.